I'm running a little bit behind tonight. We've been fellowshipping. For all those that are coming in over the internet, we've been fellowshipping. So I had a good meal tonight. Once again, just want to thank those that had a part in that. That was probably the most flavorful sandwich I've ever had in my life. So you can tell that was not from a can, but we like it from a can too around our house as well. But I appreciate all those that had a part in that, cooking and cleaning and those kind of things. So once again, it's good to be here tonight. Good to have everybody in person, and then also those coming in through the internet. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 7 tonight, and we're going to cover all 73 verses. Yeah, we ain't going to read but maybe 6 or 7 of them, those. But anyway, so if you got your Bibles, we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. Anybody remember, I feel like I ask this every week. Does anybody remember anything we talked about last week? And I keep on hoping it would be different than it is with teenagers, but sometimes it's not. So, anybody have anything? Do what? Kay's got her answers for us. Anybody? Well, the walls are done, right? The walls are done. 52 days. 52 days. The walls were done. Some 2.5 miles, 40 foot, probably close to 40 foot tall, probably 8 feet wide or so, in 52 days by some very unskilled labor. Remember we talked about how the wall would provide protection, but what was the main reason, the big drive for rebuilding the wall? Anybody? Do what? To honor God, right? This was God's city, and it lay in waste. Certainly, it was about glorifying and honoring God. You remember those that opposed the wall, even after the wall was completed, they still kept trying to attack Nehemiah and God's plan. You know, it says at the end that they were ashamed, right? And that it was clear to them that this work was done by God, and certainly God used Nehemiah and the others, but it was done through God's power and done to glorify and honor God. So tonight we see the completed walls. Let's begin reading chapter 7, verse 1. Then it was, when the wall was built and I had hung the doors, when the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed. All right, so the walls are done. The gates are hung. Time for Nehemiah to head back to the palace, right? No. The city's empty. We're going to see that here in just a few minutes. Though the walls were completed, Nehemiah was aware that there was still a lot of work to be done. They needed some strong leadership. They needed a plan of protection in addition to the walls. The walls were built, the city was ready, but it needed people. And as we see tonight, Nehemiah moves beyond the wall to ministering to the people. And that's going to be the primary focus tonight, is on the people. Normally I underline the blanks, and I did not do that on my notes tonight. So if for some reason you don't get one, holler at me, and I'll make sure that I stop for you. All right. So Nehemiah looks first to putting people on the walls. The first people that he appointed, according to verse 7 here, is the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers would watch and stand watch at the temple and also on the newly restored walls. Then he appointed singers to be on the wall. Singers to be on the wall. Now that sounds a little bit unique there. Certainly these singers would on the wall to offer security as well and offer a set of eyes on there. But maybe this was more than just about having an extra set of eyes on the wall. Maybe Nehemiah was planning to reinstate a program of public worship, and the singers in that day, like the singers on the stage here on Sunday mornings, would lead the people in worship. Sing some happy songs. You remember when we first got into Nehemiah, we looked at Psalms 137, where it talked about the people sitting in Babylon, and they didn't desire to sing any songs, right? They were in captivity. It talks about them hanging their harps in the trees, right, and refusing to sing, refusing to play. We got a little bit of a sharp contrast here. They go from hanging harps in the trees and refusing to sing to Nehemiah putting singers on the walls to lead everybody in worship. We see that he appointed Levites. Once again, these Levites on the wall would help with security. But also we know that Levites functions as teachers of the law and teachers of the law of God. Now, Nehemiah didn't do these things by chance. He had a reason and a purpose for all these things. But I can't help but think. Now, I'm walking through the city, right? And you see a gatekeeper or a guard on top of the wall, and you're like, okay, that's kind of where they're supposed to be, right? That's kind of their job, right? But then you walk down the wall there and you see somebody that's in the choir. You know what I mean? They're a singer and they're on the wall. And then you see one of the Levites, one of the ones that's responsible for teaching the law of God to the people. And you see that person on the wall. And you're like, there's got to be something here besides just security guards. There's got to be another reason for this. I can't help but think for the people that were within the city, when they looked at those singers up on the wall, and maybe they led worship from the wall. I don't know. Maybe, they looked up there and saw one of those Levites on the wall, and maybe they were speaking the truths of God's word or giving instruction from that wall. As these people looked up on that wall and they saw those singers and they saw those Levites, this would have been a good reminder for them that they needed to be looking towards God and praising God and learning about God. So Nehemiah had reasons for just putting random people on the wall. I think that's very evident by the fact that it spells out here that he had gatekeepers, singers, and also Levites on that wall. Let's continue reading there in verse 2. And it says that I gave charge of Jerusalem to my brother Hananiah, and Hananiah, the leader of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. Nehemiah saw the need to elect some new local leadership. It's possible with all that was going on that Nehemiah needed some help, that maybe there was too much for him to handle on his own. So he elected his brother Hananiah and also Hananiah to sort of help with the business going on within the city. Nehemiah did this maybe because he needed help, but also because Nehemiah knew that one day he was going to do what? What did he promise the king he would do? That he would come back. He had promised the king that one day he would return to the palace, and he wanted to make sure that they had some good leadership there, so that the city could continue to govern itself in its absence. So he appointed Hananiah, right? Or Hanani. Hanani, I got to keep those straight tonight. Hanani was Nehemiah's what? Brother. I can only imagine this, right? So Nehemiah gets up there and he's like, hey, listen, we need some leadership, and I have chosen Hanani, my brother, to lead, right? And people are like, oh yeah, Hananiah's in there because he's Nehemiah's brother, right? Certainly, Hananiah would have been a good choice to assist Nehemiah in leadership. Being brought up together, certainly you would have hoped that they'd have had the same upbringing, the same beliefs, the same moral values. So it makes sense to have Hananiah leading. As Nehemiah has seen throughout the story so far, not all those people that claim to be your friends are loyal to you, right? Some of them tried to be deceitful and tried to aid the enemy, right? You would hope that your brother would at least be loyal to you, right? So it makes sense to have Hananiah serving with him. You also remember that Hananiah was the one that delivered the message to Nehemiah that sort of got the whole ball rolling, right? He questioned Hananiah, and Hananiah shared with him about the walls, and kind of got everything going. So what does that tell us about Hananiah? He was concerned about the walls. He was concerned about the people. He was concerned, right? So certainly he would have been a good choice to be sort of supporting Nehemiah in leadership. He also appointed Hananiah. Now, the people that are like, when Nehemiah gets up there and he says, hey, I've got Hananiah, my brother, he's going to help with leadership. And the people are like, okay, that's his brother, blah, 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 blah. And then he steps up there and says, I've also got Hananiah that's going to help. That would help put them a little bit at ease, right? Because it's not just Nehemiah's brother. This would have put the people's mind at ease. This man Hananiah would have been a good person to have leading because he had experience in leadership. He was a ruler in the citadel or the palace. But Nehemiah also noticed that he was a good spiritual leader. Look at how Nehemiah defines him. He said he's a faithful man. He said that he feared God. That word feared there is to have reverence and honor. So not only did this man have leadership experience and business experience, but he was a good spiritual leader. He was a faithful man, and he feared God. I don't think that Nehemiah, in electing these men, said, who's interested in serving in these positions? I think he just sort of approached them and said, hey, I need you to do this. Hananiah, I need you to do this. Hananiah, I need you to do this. But I think before Nehemiah chose Hananiah to be in this leadership position, he had already saw these things in Hananiah's life. He had already saw that he was a faithful man, that he feared God. Hananiah may have been candidating for this position and he didn't even know it, right? Just by the way that he lived. We talked a little bit about Sunday morning about what do our lives say about what do our lives say about God? What would people say about us? Certainly, this man Hananiah was a good man. He feared God. He was faithful. Let's continue reading there in verse 3. And Nehemiah said, and I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. While they stand guard, let them shut and bar the doors, and appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, one at his watch station and another in front of his own house. The gates had to be guarded, and Nehemiah gave very specific instructions to these ones that were guarding the gates. I read one quote in studying to teach tonight that said, gates are only as good as their guards. Right? Doesn't matter if you got really strong gates, right? If the guys running the gates, opening and shutting the gates, aren't responsible, right? The Great Wall of China was breached various times, but most famously by Genghis Khan, who reportedly said this. Listen to what Genghis Khan said before invading the Great Wall of China. He said, the strength of the wall depends on the courage of those who defend it. You know how Genghis Khan, breached the Great Wall of China? He bribed one of the guards. So he says, listen, these walls are great, right? They're strong, they're fortified, but if you don't have good men on the walls, right, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. The city needed a strategy to be put in place to defend themselves from attack. These gatekeepers were instructed just to open the gates a few hours each day. Now the walls are built. The gates are hung, but Jerusalem was not populated at this time, right? They had some people in there, but it was not fully populated. And certainly there were those that would desire to come in and do harm to the city. And Nehemiah said, these people, if they're going to sneak in, they're going to sneak in the early morning and the late evening, right? At dark time when people do shady stuff. So Nehemiah says, listen, we're not going to leave the gates open all day. Typically, these gates would be open at sunrise and they would shut again at sunset. Nehemiah said, we're not going to do that. We're going to leave these gates open in the busiest times of the day, in the middle of the day when everybody is up and everybody is moving around. That way, if there's somebody shady trying to come into the city that would do harm, there's more people out there. Most likely someone will notice them and they'll be found out. These city guards were told not only to guard at their stations on the walls, but they were also told to guard in their neighborhoods. I guess this was probably the first installation of neighborhood watch. Okay. They were guard at the stations, but then they had double duty. When they were in their neighborhoods, they were supposed to look after their neighborhoods. Once again, you assign a man to look after his neighborhood, he's going to make sure he does a good job at it, right? Because that's where his family lives, and we would be serious about protecting our home. It was smart for Nehemiah to plan. But don't think that Nehemiah didn't have any lack of faith in God from planning. Proverbs 22 verse 3 says that a prudent man, in other words, a man that plans for the future, foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. To have faith in God, but also be alert and attentive to what is going on around us, right? So if someone does seek to do us harm, we'll be aware of it and not be punished, looking for that evil. We are to plan for the future and be prepared for what might come. Let's continue reading there in verse 4. Now the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few, and the houses were not rebuilt. Then my God put it into my heart to gather the nobles, the rulers, and the people, that they might be registered by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of those who had came up in the first return, and found written in it, these are the people of the province who came back from the captivity, of those who had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away, and who returned to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to his city. So this city, though it is rebuilt, though the walls are rebuilt, it's empty inside. It's lacking two things. What were those two things that Nehemiah said it was lacking? Lacking people. And if you got to have people, you got to have houses, right? So it was lacking people and it was lacking houses. Many speculate that the city of Jerusalem consisted of about 260 acres. Okay, so this was not a small little place. And of the 52,000 Jews who had returned with Zerubbabel and Ezra, very few of these people settled within the broken walls. Does that make sense? The people of Judah had enemies, right? I mean, when you're inside the walls provide some kind of protection. But if the walls are broken down, is there any protection? No. You'd be better off not grouping up with a bunch of other people, because that's just going to make you more an enticing group of people to attack, right? You're going to want to spread out, right? Go into the woods somewhere and put down some roots, right? So this city had been empty. Now the walls are up, and it's time to bring the people back in. Nehemiah, under the leading of God, he says there, verse 5, then my God put it into my heart to gather the nobles, the rulers, and the people, that they might be registered by the genealogy. Nehemiah, under the leading of God, devises a plan to repopulate this city. 90 years before Nehemiah's return, Zerubbabel had taken a census or sorts of the initial returnees, those two returnees that came in the first two waves. Nehemiah found this list. He found this registry. This list was characterized by their clans, by their communities, by their vocation, or their profession. Now we're going to cover the bulk of the verses tonight, all right? This would allow Nehemiah, this registry would allow Nehemiah to repopulate Judah with equal representation. In this list, verses 39 through 42, you see the priest. Verses 43, you see the Levites. Verses 44, you see the singers. The gatekeepers in verse 45, the temple servants, verses 46 through 56, the descendants of Solomon's servants, 57 through 61, the descendants of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, verses 61 through 62, and the non-documented priest, 63 through 65. Non-documented priest. Anyone want to got an idea what a non-documented priest is? They didn't get their green cards, right? No. No, that's not what a non-documented priest was. A non-documented priest was one that could not prove their ancestry. They could not prove that they were in the priestly line. And while it's true that some of these non-documented priests were probably pure, you know what I mean, and they were qualified to work in the temple, but unless they knew for sure, unless they could document it and make for sure, Nehemiah wasn't going to take any risk by putting somebody in the temple that did not belong, that was not in accordance with God's will. Nehemiah was very particular in making sure that he had leaders with lives of purity. Nehemiah wanted to repopulate the city, but he wanted to repopulate it with pure Jewish people. As I kind of read about that, and I thought about, Nehemiah opening up this city of God and wanting it, to be filled with genuine Jews, those of pure of heart. My mind kind of goes to the other end of the book, right? Revelation, right? One day we're going to gather in God's holy city, right? But there's a condition, right? You got to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. You got to be pure. You got to have your sins washed away, or you won't inherit that city of God. Why did Nehemiah want Jewish people within the walls? Because he wanted people that would be loyal citizens to Judah. He wanted citizens that would be devoted to God. He wanted city dwellers that would promote purity and devotion to God. He didn't want spies in there. He didn't want people in there that were teaching things that were contrary to God's word, that was going against what they were trying to do. Nehemiah wanted to sort of search out anyone that might try to cause harm to Jerusalem or the people within it. Skip over last verse. Verse 73. I told y'all we were going to cover the whole book tonight, all 73 verses, and y'all didn't believe me. 73. So the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, and some of the people, and the Nethinim. Now that word Nethinim, those would be like temple servants. Okay, so you've got the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, the people, the temple servants, and all of Israel dwelt in their cities. So now they're in the 7th month, probably around September or October. The walls are finished, the gates are hung, and they have repopulated this city. The chapter ends with the people organized under Nehemiah's godly leadership, right? He's elected some leaders to help to guide the people, right? He's got the singers on the wall. He's got the teachers on the wall, the teachers of the law. So what is the application? What is the application for us tonight? Well, one of the big things for me that jumps out of this story is we gotta see a job to its completion. Okay, if you start something, don't stop. Right? Nehemiah, throughout the first 7 chapters that we've looked at, he had a lot of opportunities where maybe someone that wasn't committed would have given up. Right? Got frustrated when the people went to groaning and complaining. Could have got frustrated and said, "I quit." When the opposition tried to tear him down and discourage him and speak ill of him, Nehemiah could have said, "You know what? I'm done." You know what I mean? And just walked away, right? It wasn't like he didn't have anywhere to go, right? Because I'm sure the king would have loved to have him back in the palace, right? But he hung in there till the job was completed. And even after chapter 7, verse 1, where it says the walls are completed and the gates are hung, Nehemiah could have said, "Hey, I'm done." You know what I mean? The job was to rebuild the walls, and the walls are rebuilt. But he didn't do that. He began electing the leadership, right, and bringing the people back in, making sure that the city would be protected and that it would be secure and that the right people would be in there. I think it's safe to say that Nehemiah was an extra miler. I mean, he continued beyond what was expected of him. We should always desire to do that in our ministry. I wrote down here sort of some steps in this process, solving this problem of the walls being destroyed and the walls being in rubble. And this is kind of how Nehemiah kind of moved through it. Well, first of all, he determined the problem. He saw the problem, right? He went out there and investigated the walls. And then he developed a vision. When he announced to the people that they were going to build the walls, he had already been thinking on it. He had a game plan, right? Drew on the wisdom and support of others. He listened to those that were honoring God to see what direction to go. Certainly he turned to God in prayer. We see that many times throughout this book. He delegated the work. He delegated the resources. And then he implemented a plan and saw it through until its completion. Next week, we're going to begin in chapter 8. If you want to read ahead, I don't know how many verses we're going to cover next week. I haven't looked that far ahead at it. But in Nehemiah chapter 8, you've got the walls built, got the gates are hung, you got the people in there, and you see the people really have a desire to hear from God. They want to know what God has to say to them. And we're going to look at what that looks like next week in chapter 8. So, anybody have any questions or comments for tonight? Anybody? I enjoy teaching. I'm not saying I'm always good at it. Sometimes my tongue gets in the way. But I enjoy teaching, but it's really good. I really enjoy teaching when people learn. So I hope you learned something tonight. Yes, Sue? Let me see. Oh, the first little block there. Jerusalem needed strong leadership. They needed a plan of protection. And it needed to have its people returned. So let's say 3 P's, but it wasn't. It's not. It's an L and 2 P's. That's why pastors write sermons, right? 3 P's and a poem, right? So I don't do that, but some pastors do. Anybody else? Anything else?
So did Nehemiah brother, did he live in Jerusalem?
It's possible he had to have lived there or at least been through there to know about the condition of the walls and to bring it to Nehemiah. I believe he probably lived there, and he made it a point to go see Nehemiah and share with Nehemiah what was going on there. So he probably lived in the area or around the area is what I would guess.
So he shouldn't have had any problem being appointed to lead.
No, he would have known. Well, I mean, the people would have been spread out. You know what I mean, for the most part at this point. But some would have known him for sure. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else? Before we get into our prayer time, I have one announcement tonight, and I was afraid I was going to forget it. Todd, we got the kids program on June the 5th. So Todd and Andrea have asked if they could have the sanctuary for the next 3 Wednesday nights to practice with the kids on the stage. So we're meeting. We're just going to meet in the overflow where we had started off at for the next 3 weeks. So the next 3 Wednesdays. So 3 Wednesdays from now. I think June the 1st is the last one, the third one or something like that. So we're going to meet in the sanctuary the next 3 weeks for Bible study so that they can use the sanctuary. Huh? Yeah, what did I say?
We're meeting in the sanctuary.
Yeah, we're not meeting in the sanctuary.
We got you.
We're meeting in the overflow. Overflow. Thank you. I told you my tongue gets in the way sometimes. Anybody? Any prayer requests for tonight? Prayer time. Yes.
I think we need